to Dr. Vladimir Morosan.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. It's a pleasure to be back with you for this second webinar. And once again, I want to express my appreciation to Father Tom for the initiative to hold these webinars, and to all of you for all the many positive comments and feedback that we received from our first session back in January. And it was very, very gratifying and inspiring. This week, as we did previously, we're going to be addressing three different levels of concern, the liturgical, the musical, and the practical, as we turn our attention this week to the Liturgy of the Presanctified Gifts, and also to the Sundays of Great Lent, because they contain some things we need to pay attention to as well and prepare for. Those of you who attended our first webinar will recall that we talked a lot about using this time, this extra time this year actually that we have before the Lenten Triodion begins, to do a SOAR review. Father, if you could advance the slides to, okay, that's contact. Yeah, that's the seminar series. Okay, the SOAR review there. And just to go over, this is a good time to go over the experience of past years and to list out some of the successes, what went well, to note some of the opportunities for improvement, what didn't go well, what our aspirations are for this period of Lent and Pascha, musically speaking, and what are some of the concrete results we hope to achieve. We also talked about some of the criteria by which we measure success and appropriateness. Some of you, if you missed the first session, this is an opportunity to review these. We just included these slides for completeness, although as Father mentioned, you'll also have access to last session's material as well. We talked about the fact that this is a good time to review our music books and other materials that you might want to use this year. And this is especially true for the first week of Great Lent, when immediately following the Sunday of Forgiveness, which this year is on March 14th, we must hit the road running, ready for the liturgical sprint that occurs during the first week of Great Lent. Once that Monday comes around, there is only time for action, not for any preparation. You know, like that hymn that we sing in the third week, now is the time for action. Well, for choir directors, now is the time for action. Because in the middle of the services of the first week, when we have those 4 installments of the Great Penitential Canon of St. Andrew, we also have the first Liturgy of the Presanctified Gifts. Now, those of you who are of a younger generation may not realize that this service in its present form, that of an evening liturgy, most often in most parishes on Wednesday nights, but also prescribed to be served on Friday, and sometimes taking place on Friday evenings as well, was largely due to the focus that was placed upon the entire Lenten and Paschal cycle by Father Alexander Schmemann, the eminent theologian, author, and late dean of St. Vladimir Seminary. Prior to that, if this service was served in some parishes at all, it was done according to the standard Russian practice that had come to be established over the last few centuries. And namely, that the Liturgy of the Presanctified, despite being clearly an evening service, it's in effect Vespers followed by the distribution of Holy Communion, was typically served in the mornings of Wednesday and Friday. And it continues to be served that way in Russia, largely, to this day. And predictably, there were very few people in attendance and very few communicants. So it was largely as a result of Father Alexander's efforts that parishes began to serve the liturgy of the Presanctified in the evening, at least once a week, and in some cases twice a week, as prescribed on Wednesdays and Fridays. There are also a few other special feast days during Lent, if they fall during Lent, that the liturgy of the Presanctified is prescribed. And by all indications, this service, almost more than any other Lenten services, has sort of caught on. It's attracting large numbers of faithful and communicants, and usually followed by a common meal, followed the Eucharistic fast, which has been established as lasting a minimum of 6 hours. Now, musically, the combination of Vespers and liturgy during the Lenten period also offers a degree of unique sort of richness, part of that bright sadness that our theologians talk about. And so it gives us as church musicians some fruitful food for thought. With the proper foresight and preparation, we can make this an extraordinarily special service, musically speaking. Now, the first aspect that I'd like to discuss are the litanies, of which there are quite a few. These are typically sung to the so-called Lenten Melody, which is likely familiar to most of you in one form or another, and it's this sol fa mi, Lord have mercy. And in its harmonized form, this is how it appears. I thought this was kind of interesting to see. Now I'm going to try and screen share. Can everyone see that? Let's see. Screen sharing, come on, come on, come on. Okay, I don't know if anyone can see what I'm trying to screen share.
Yes, yes. Well, right now we just see your email.
Yeah, no, that's not what I want to screen. There we go.
Yeah.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so you see that this is straight out of Bachmetjev's Obichod of 1869, and this is how we've come to know it in this country. What's striking about this particular version of the Lenten Melody is the seventh chord, which does not resolve as you might expect. It doesn't really, can you hear that in the background? It doesn't, you would expect the dominant seventh to resolve to F major, but it doesn't do that until the final Amen. Amen. Now, the seventh chord, as we know from our standard study of harmony, is considered to be very dissonant and unstable. Some composers, most notably Tchaikovsky, complained bitterly about the use of the seventh chord in church music, how inappropriate it is, how grating it is. And he tried to avoid it as much as possible. Not only Tchaikovsky, but other composers as well. They try to scrupulously avoid it in their compositions and chant arrangements. On the other hand, I've heard explanations, I've heard it said, can't remember exactly by whom or in what circumstances, that the seventh chord is used in Lent to somehow symbolize and represent our striving forward towards Pascha, our Lenten journey towards repentance. And so you have this never resolving kind of chord progression that kind of leaves you hanging and urges you on. Well, I don't know. As I say, that may be somewhat apocryphal, but I think that while the concept of a signature Lenten melody is a valid one, in actual musical content and character, this melody can take many different forms. Today, for example, if you look at Russian websites, you'll find several different renditions identified as Lenten melodies. In our own practice here in America, if you're familiar with the excellent collection of music called the Liturgy of the Presanctified Gifts, which Father, you had there up on a slide a few slides ago. There's a link. If you don't know this collection, the 1990 edition. There are two editions of this collection, the 1973 and the 1990. The one in published in 1990. It's still available from SVS Press, and it is a really truly excellent collection. There are 4 variants of the traditional Lenten melody, 2 forms having with one with the traditional dominant 7th harmony, and one with a similar melody but a modal minor harmony that sounds, let's see. So I can't see my keyboard and I'm trying to play by feel, but you get the idea. Then there's a Znameni chant as harmonized by Archangelski, and then there's a Byzantine chant in tone 5. I've asked some of my colleagues who work in the Byzantine realm if there is such a thing as a Lenten melody in the Byzantine tradition, and they had this kind of puzzled expression on their face. I don't think there is really. There is perhaps the use of a mode of the mode 1 plagal, which is our tone 5, but it's not necessarily, there's no signature melody as such. Our practice at our mission of St. Catherine in Carlsbad, and I will emphasize that just like I did last week, that what I'm describing is simply our local practice, and by no means it's necessarily definitive. I'm just sharing you with what we do in our small mission in, actually it's a large mission in Carlsbad. So what we do is we use a version of the Lenten melodies that have a slight rhythmic modification, where in those cases where there's been an adaptation of Господи помилуй that turns out to be Lord have mercy, sort of like Lord have mercy, the word Lord gets lost. And so in the version that we use, we've modified that rhythmic structure a bit to include the word Lord in this manner. So we simply make Lord a dotted half note, if you can see that. Lord have mercy. And also to the array of litanies in the SVS Presanctified book, we've also added a version called Armenian Chant that is attributed to the late Archbishop Job. And it also kind of gives a modal flavor. There's the modal version of the litany, the minor. There's another version of the minor harmony. And finally, this is all in your packet. And there's the Armenian version. So if I can. It's kind of slightly exotic flavor there. One final thing to point out about these Lenten litanies is that, like most four-part arrangements of chant melodies, there may be a hierarchy of voices: melody, harmony, bass, and filler, in that order of importance. And so if, depending on the voices that you have available and their relative strengths and weaknesses, you can revoice these litanies to kind of accommodate that, and to make sure that the melody is the strongest and the harmony is clearly heard. And then next would be the bass part, and the filler part can sometimes be omitted if there are no strong voices to sing that. And you certainly don't want to have a strong voice singing the filler part and thus obliterating everybody else. So that's our discussion of litanies. Like all services during Great Lent, the Liturgy of the Presanctified has a prescribed kathisma, or section of the Psalter, assigned to it. On Wednesdays and Fridays of weeks 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6, this is the 18th kathisma, which consists of the Psalms 119 through 133, the so-called Psalms of Ascent, which are divided then into 3 portions referred to as antiphons. During week 5 of Great Lent, there's somewhat different order of the kathismata. Instead of the 18th kathisma on Wednesday, the 7th kathisma is prescribed. There's a somewhat complicated explanation as to why that happens. I won't go into all that here. The only instruction that's found in liturgical books about the manner of executing the 18th, or for that matter, any other kathisma, is to recite verse by verse. The Slavonic word is stichoslovich, so literally means recite verse by verse, which in every other case, except for the first kathisma, Blessed is the man at Great Vespers or Vigil, usually means that the reader simply reads it on a single note. In other words, there are no special instructions for the 18th kathisma at the Presanctified Liturgy, and one will not find any melodies found in any printed chant books of the Russian or Slavic tradition. There are indications that in earlier times, the kathismas of the Psalter were in fact executed in a more musical, more elaborate fashion. The great Russian liturgical musicologist, Professor Johann von Gardner, has an entire article devoted to this topic. It's in Russian. I don't think I've seen it translated into English, although some of Gardner's articles have in fact been translated, and I highly recommend them to you. So I think I'm being accurate here when I say that in 1973, when the first edition of the Presanctified Liturgy was being prepared at St. Vladimir Seminary, that David Drillock, who was professor of liturgical music at the time, basically invented a simple 2-phrase melody, which was essentially a recitation tone followed by a little melodic turn, and then a cadential phrase. So, mi, 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 fa, mi, re, mi, re, do. And in that initial book, there was no attribution. But by the time we were working on the second edition in 1990, Dave agreed that his name should appear on the arrangement, just for historical accuracy. And at the same time, we decided to add another version that was in a minor key that is an alternative. Da 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 da, which was something of my devisement. And unfortunately, I have to admit that in hindsight, the key in which that minor version was notated, G minor, is probably too high to be practical. It would be much easier to sing it in a lower key, such as E minor or even D minor. Now, I've encountered various ways in which this melody has been utilized. In the Department of Liturgical or Department of Religious Education booklets here, which you're familiar with, I'm sure, it shows choir A singing phrase A and choir B singing phrase B. And this is perhaps the way it was initially sung at the seminary and other places. I think the impetus for this instruction was a sound one to get the idea of antiphonal singing of psalms. However, there are some practical observations here I'd like to make. My observation concerning this is that, first of all, it's difficult when one splits the psalm verse this way in two halves. It's difficult to coordinate the tempo and the momentum between the two choirs in this way. And if you give just the cadential phrase to one of the choirs, it's a surefire formula for extreme flatting, because you're always, the choir A sings, in my distress I cry to the Lord, and then the second choir is always going, ba-da-da-da-da-dum, 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 and every time that descending passage goes lower and lower and lower and lower. I don't know if that matches your experience, but that's been my experience in a number of situations. So I believe that a better way, or actually perhaps a more accurate way, historically, traditionally accurate way of dividing the psalms between the two choirs is to alternate a complete verse at a time, with choir A singing a full verse and then choir B singing a full verse, and so on and so forth. And they alternate in this manner until the final two Alleluias. Alleluia, 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 glory to thee, O God. The other choir repeats Alleluia, 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 glory to thee, O God. And then the two choirs come together and sing the final Alleluia. Having said that, I will be quick to point out that if this cannot be done smoothly or effectively by two choirs, however one defines that, it could be just two singers standing on either side, or they could be standing next to each other for that matter, that it's perfectly acceptable just simply to have two choirs or two singers chant those psalms, alternating verse by verse. And they can use a single note or whatever manner of reading they're accustomed to, or they can use one of these simple melodies, such as the ones given in the Presanctified Liturgy book. At St. Catherine Mission, when we have our full complement of singers in non-COVID times, we've typically divided the choir into men and women, with each group singing three-part harmony. At that point in the service, when the kathisma begins, the men go over to the other side while the women stay on the cleros, and we proceed to sing the psalms in this manner. And usually we have three-voice parts of each gender, but sometimes we just have two parts, in which case they sing the melody in thirds without the lower part. And I find that however you do this, it's just a beautiful way to start the liturgy of the pre-sanctified gifts. And my only wish is that more members of the congregation would join in singing these psalms, because it's quite a remarkable experience to hear a large congregation. I've heard this at a couple of Carpathian Russian parishes where the entire congregation will join, the men on the one side, the women on the other side, and they alternate in verse by verse, singing the psalms in this way. On another practical note, the versions given in the collection, the St. Vladimir's collection, are divided into verses, but without pointing. In your packet, I've included the version, a copy of what we use at St. Catherine, where the verses are pointed using boldface type. So also a few verses are divided a bit differently. So if you find this a convenient version to use, by all means, feel free to use it. Just go through it and note some of those places where the pointing has been altered somewhat. I've also included a version of the seventh Kathisma for use on Wednesday of the 5th week. So speaking of that, just mentioning that if you do the reason that adjustment is made in the Kathismata is in the case that if the complete canon of St. Andrew is repeated on Thursday of the 5th week, as it's supposed to be, as it prescribed in the Typikon, with its 798 prostrations. If your parish doesn't do the full canon, you may want to check with your priest and simply stay with the 18th Kathisma. Usually by the 5th week, it all goes pretty smoothly. But if you do the canon, then you may want to change to the 7th Kathisma. And then by Friday of the 5th week, the 18th Kathisma is back. But on Friday, parenthetically, Friday of the 5th week, that's usually when the akathist to the Most Holy Theotokos is served in many of our parishes. And also in your packet, you'll find a pointed copy of the akathist along with the pattern that we use. So if that's useful to you, it's there in the packet. By all means, feel free to use it. One other detail I should mention is that during the singing of the third antiphon, Psalm 131, at the verse, "Arise, O Lord, to thy resting place, thou and the ark of thy might," this is when the priest in the altar transfers the pre-sanctified holy gifts from the altar to the table of oblation. In some churches, this moment is signified by a ringing of a little bell, at which point the congregation kneels. When the transfer is complete, the bell is rung again and a signal for everyone to rise. In our church, we don't have a bell like that. We simply stop singing at that verse. Everyone kneels, the congregation, the singers, everyone kneels. And we simply, we listen for the sound of the censer and of the curtain being pulled open. And then we rise and continue singing the psalm. I don't know if this is how it is in your parish, but whatever the case, this is just a good thing to discuss, kind of review ahead of time with your priest and make sure that your signals are synchronized, exactly what he is going to expect you to be doing during the third antiphon there. There are certainly other patterns that can be used for chanting those psalms of the 18th Kathisma. Some of them are quite beautiful. And as I mentioned, there are no specific melodies that one can point to in the traditional chant books. So the field, in one sense, is wide open. But it's interesting to note how quickly things become traditional, quote unquote. One Wednesday evening, a different melody was used than David Drillock's well-familiar melody. And which, as we know now, is not even 50 years old. But the congregation made it very, very clear that they did not want to hear any changes. They wanted to hear the traditional melody for the Psalms. And so just a word to the wise, any changes need to be done very, very subtly and very sensitively with discussion with your priest and kind of keeping an ear on the pulse of the congregation. Well, following the antiphons, the vesperal portion of the Presanctified Liturgy continues with the usual Lord I Call, and this is followed by the full complement of 10 stihira, just like on Saturday evening. These stihira are taken from the Lenten Triodion according to the week of Great Lent. Some are drawn from the daily cycle, and they are completed by the stihira for the saint of the day. All of these are available on the OCA website in pointed form. Now, all I can say about these particular stihira cycles is that they really test one's knowledge of the tones, especially if you're singing them from pointed texts. So, because any given week you may have 4 or even 3, certainly 4 or 5 different tones, and that's before you get to the saints of the day. So this may be a good time to remind you of the hierarchy of preference that we mentioned last week. And I think you have a slide that we're showing that slide again. So if there's any chance that the choir cannot sing these verses well and without getting the tones confused, this would be a time to apply these preferences. You certainly may have the reader read the verses loudly and clearly. You may have one singer sing the verses. You might have a select group of singers, those who know their tones backwards and forwards and in their sleep, and can do that without any mistakes. Or you can do it with a whole choir, but if the choir knows the tones and won't have get into any train wrecks along the way. Just as a parenthetical note, on Wednesday of the 5th week, again, that's the week that all kinds of extra stuff happens. We have the 24 penitential stihira at Lord I Call, each of which is followed by the refrain, "Save me before I perish completely, O Lord." Now, there are various ways of rendering these. We usually assign them to 2 different readers. But at the end of each verse, I've enclosed in your packet a particularly memorable refrain, which I first encountered in my student days when I was singing at the in the choir of St. Alexander Nevsky Cathedral in Paris. And it's it's a melody that kind of, it's an earworm that stays with you in a very good way. Save me before I perish completely, O Lord. Following the stihira, we have Gladsome Light and the Old Testament readings. Again, it's a little, we mentioned the fact that the Liturgy of the Presanctified is clearly an evening service, and so it's a little odd if you serve it in the morning to be singing now that we have come to the setting of the sun. But when we get to Holy Week, we will mention the fact that that sometimes time does not apply in the church, in our liturgy of the church. It is indeed timeless and eternal, and so the church sometimes does do evening services in the morning and morning services in the evening. I'll pitch that one to Father Tom during our session 2 weeks from now to give a full explanation of that. No, I'm just kidding. So following the gladsome light, after you have the Old Testament readings, and then after the prokimenon, there are 2 prokimena, as you know. All the prokimena appear in the book that I've been referring to, the Presanctified Liturgy. They are there in 3 variants, if I'm not mistaken. The Znameni, the Common, and the Serbian chant. Then after the second prokimenon, the priest makes a solemn proclamation and comes out with a large lighted candle. The light of Christ illumines all, and everyone in the church prostrates. Here, the choir is not in the process of singing, so in connection with what we said about prostrations last week, prostrations in the choir, here it would be appropriate for the singers to make a prostration along with everyone else. Just watch out if you have light music stands, watch out for the music stands when you do the prostrations. You don't want to lose any choir members this early in the season. So then after the second reading comes Let My Prayer Arise, which, as you may notice, follows the exact structure of a prokimenon, or rather a great prokimenon, based on the number of verses. And in fact, it is a prokimenon whose use is very ancient, but whose role and function has changed somewhat. From a prokimenon preceding, usually a prokimenon precedes the reading of scripture, but in this case, this great prokimenon, Let My Prayer Arise, became sort of its own self-contained liturgical entity. But it constitutes a very important devotional moment of corporate prayer in the Liturgy of the Presanctified. Back when we had different rites in the Orthodox Church in the first millennium, you had the Rite of Constantinople, which was different from the Rite of Jerusalem, which was also different from the rite used on the Holy Mountain. So in Constantinople, the verses of the psalm were chanted in an elaborate fashion by a soloist who stood in the middle of the church on the ambo, which in fact in those days was in the center of the church. Now we've kind of attached the ambo to the solea, but before it was kind of a pulpit really in the center of the church. And while the soloist sang the verses, the whole congregation sang the refrain, and the clergy were seated in the altar, much as they are when the bishop serves. That they're seated in the altar during the following the Trisagion. But eventually, the role of the clergy changed, but the assignment of the verses to a soloist or a group of soloists has remained. In some traditions, the priest intones the verses. But this practice of having a soloist or a group of soloists come out to the center of the church for singing Let My Prayer Arise is indeed a very ancient one. And it serves to heighten the importance of this prayer. Now, this is more easily accomplished, of course, in practice if the soloists have a relatively easy path from the kleros to the center of the church and back. If the choir is sequestered in a choir loft, this may be a little bit more problematic. But during the singing of this hymn, everyone in the church kneels, and this may include the members of the choir. The soloist, of course, remains standing while they're singing. Then when the refrain is sung, the choir rises to their feet, sings the refrain, and the soloists kneel, and so on and so forth. If you have two choirs, the right choir would sing the refrain one time, then the left choir would sing it another time, and while the right choir is singing, the left choir kneels. While the left choir is singing, the right choir kneels. You see how it is. You kneel when you're not actively singing. Of course, during the pandemic, if the number of choir members is restricted, this all may not be practical because the soloists, so-called, may be the ones singing the refrain also. So you have to adjust to that. Now, as far as musical settings are concerned, in a great many parishes of the Slavic tradition, the one version of this prokeimenon is a trio by Bortniansky. Bortniansky lived 1751 to 1825, and there are some parishes where this is the only known and the only acceptable version. Well, to that, I like to say, you know, the church did sing this hymn before Bortniansky. So this well-known trio in G minor, which is, by the way, number 2 of 4 different settings that Bortniansky wrote. I dare say none of us have ever heard the other 3 settings in church. But number 2, there's an English adaptation of this trio in the 1990 edition of Liturgy of Presanctified. It's somewhat meticulously nuanced with numerous dynamic markings, and that's taken straight from the composer's original. When it's performed well by a well-balanced trio of good soloists, this piece can be quite beautiful, if a little bit dramatic and a little bit sentimental for some tastes, but its beauty is indisputable. However, there are other versions of Let My Prayer Arise. In the Presanctified Liturgy book, there are 6 to be exact, and I would encourage you to explore them, particularly if you don't have that usually well-balanced trio of good soloists under conditions of COVID. If you have just one good soloist, there's a relatively simple Byzantine Chant version. There's also the Russian Greek Chant version, which in the Presanctified book is given with male chorus refrain. In your packet, you have another version of this chant with a mixed chorus refrain. So there are lots of different choices. One version I'm particularly fond of, which requires one good solo voice and an unison, is the Carpatho-Russian chant version. Now, many of you were quite young when the very first album by Archangel Voices, with the Voice of the Archangel, came out. And on this album, there are only 8 singers, and the whole focus of this recording was to show, to offer selections from various services that can be sung with a very small complement of voices. So here, just about a short excerpt from Let My Prayer Arise, which here is beautifully sung by Father Sergius Halverson. Father Tom, can you roll that for us, please?
That faith that is usually covered by a tongue has finally made an appearance.
Let my prayer arise in thy sight as incense.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Father Tom. So the refrain that's used here is the one that's number 2 in the St. Vladimir's book, the one in G minor, and it works quite well. Or you can use the one with the dominant 7th, although to my ear, that one sounds a little out of place after that glorious chanting. On the podobin.org website, you'll find a slightly simplified version of this melody by Father Martin Nicolai. You might want to look at that one as well. And in your packet, there's another version of the refrain that is commonly heard in Russia, sort of a Kievan chant that's there for your consideration as well. Now, more than 18 years ago, that's how time flies, in 2002, the man who can well be considered the father of American Orthodox composers, Father Sergei Glagoliev, celebrated the 50th anniversary of his ordination. And to mark that anniversary, Psalm Music Press published a collection of his sacred works. As I say, some of you may be too young to remember this, but a few years later after that, the Capella Romana recorded many of those works on an album entitled Lay Aside All Earthly Cares. And this was a wonderful project with Father Sergei's presence and with his active participation. He actually does the exclamations on some of the tracks. So this collection contains many musical settings that I commend to you, including a very beautiful and not very difficult trio of Let My Prayer Arise. And I'd like to play a brief excerpt from that as well. Hello, Father Tom. Are you there? He might have stepped away for a moment. Well, let's see. I don't know if I can do that from
Sorry, hold on 1 second.
Oh, here we go.
Hold on. It's not sharing. Hold on 1 second.
Okay, it just gives you an idea. I should mention also, we have a slide there that shows that Father Sergei's selected choral works, Volume 1, are available from seraphim6.com, which took over the work of Psalm Music Press, and so is this CD. So in that same volume and in your packet, you have also Father Sergei's versions of the Lenten litanies, his reimagining of the harmony there. You'll notice that in the packet, the music is marked with a watermark sample, and so we ask that you don't copy those. But if you need to get those works or the entire collection, please contact Seraphim 6. So one final thought concerning Let My Prayer Arise is that we simply must do whatever we can as singers to honor this moment in the service as a solemn offering of prayer of the entire congregation. Do whatever you can to make it as solemn and special as you can. Go out into the center of the church. That already makes it special. Choose a setting that can be sung beautifully, even if it's musically simple. Practice it in advance. Start practicing it now. If you can do the Bortniansky trio, that's great. If not, try Father Sergei's trio. What I would discourage, however, is singing, oh, let's just sing the melody of the Bortniansky trio, or somehow muscle through it with poorly and out of tune because it's been the default for the last 50 or 100 years. And to use the dominant seventh refrain with that, Bortniansky, by the way, has his own refrain, which is in the Presanctified book, but very seldom is that refrain sung. Usually choirs default to the dominant seventh refrain. So those are just some parting thoughts about Let My Prayer Arise. After that, the prayer of Saint Ephrem the Syrian is said once. And at this point, again, it's perfectly appropriate for the choir to do the appointed prostrations, since they're not singing at the time. And as I mentioned before, just watch the music stands. Following that, there's a series of litanies. And then we come to the cherubic hymn of the Liturgy of the Presanctified, Now the Powers of Heaven. Like the regular cherubic hymn, this is sung slowly since it needs to cover certain liturgical actions in the altar. Then there's an entrance with the holy gifts made in silence and with everyone kneeling, including the choir, following which the hymn continues with Let Us Draw Near in Faith and Love. Now, concerning this silent entrance, there's a funny story that perhaps you've heard about the New Mission parish with a recently ordained priest and a choir comprised largely of converts who were singing the Presanctified Liturgy for the very first time this particular Lent. And so the entrance happens, everybody is making a full prostration, and there's total silence and more silence and more silence, and everybody's on their face and they don't know when to get up. And so evidently the priest did not realize that he's supposed to say, let us draw near in faith and love, softly but audibly, and that this was the cue for the choir singers to stand up and continue singing. So again, as with the transfer, as the other transfer, the first transfer of the gifts during Psalm 131, make sure you check with your priest and get your signals squared away so that you avoid such humorously awkward moments. Now, in terms of repertoire, the 1990 edition of the Liturgy of the Presanctified offers no fewer than 10 variants of this hymn, from the very simple to the fairly complex. Again, in many parishes, the setting by Bortniansky in 3/4 time, which is just one of 3 that he wrote, but that's become somewhat of a fixture over the years, in part because it was the one that was included in Bachmetjev's Obichod of 1869. And we already mentioned last session how certain hymns have remained fixtures because of that 1869. Here we are 150 years later, still feeling the effects of that collection. But that setting by Bortniansky, at least when it's sung in its original form, requires some fairly good sopranos. So it would not necessarily be my first choice for a parish choir of average abilities. There's also a simplified version in the SVS book of that arrangement. But in your packet, I call several other settings to your attention. There's one by Father Sergei, again. There's one by Benedict Sheehan. And there are 3 versions by Walter Obliszczuk, who is our colleague from Holy Trinity Cathedral in Boston. And I'd like to just point those out to you. There's one that he doesn't identify, but it sounds a lot like a Byzantine melody, or possibly a Serbian Byzantine melody in tone 3, which makes it very much singable with just the melody and the ison. Then there's another one that he calls Source Unknown, which also looks very much like Byzantine tone 1. And in fact, I tested that theory out by extracting the melody and putting an ison to it. And it works very well that way. And the third version by Walter, for you lovers of Znameni chant out there, I know there are several of you out there, there's a piece of early Russian Znameni polyphony for 3 voices, which can be sung either by 3 men's voices or 3 women's voices, or possibly some combination of the 2. Keeping in mind what we've been saying about these things throughout our presentations, it's just important to make repertoire choices that allow us to sing this hymn in the best possible way with the voices at our disposal, whether in the pandemic or beyond. So if there's a chance that we don't have all 4 parts adequately represented, I like to choose musical settings with that hierarchy of voices where it's clear. You have melody, harmony, bass, and filler. I've already mentioned it today with regards to the litanies, but particularly with a hymn like Now the Powers of Heaven, if you can have the melody assigned to either the sopranos or the altos, depending on what voices are present, and this can be sung in harmony with either a third above or a sixth below by the tenors. This way, the filler part can either be omitted or assigned to the weakest voice part. So this is something to consider. And from that standpoint, most of the versions in the SVS book don't quite fulfill this criterion, with the exception of the, what I mean by that is that they require 4 voices. The voice parts sort of function independently of another. And so you can't just leave out one part if you don't have all 4 parts represented. But there is a Carpatho-Russian chant version on page 182, which for our choir at St. Catherine, I transposed to a mixed choir arrangement. And I also offer it there in the packet for your consideration, because that one works that way. You have 2 upper parts singing in parallel thirds, and then a bass part and a filler part. And that filler part can very easily be omitted, and the combination of the melody and harmony on the 2 top voices can be assigned to the best combination of voices. And then also in your packet is a Kievan chant setting by Father Vladimir Soroka from Podobin.org that also works well in that regard. So let's see, how are we doing on time? Well, we started a few minutes late. We're going to take our 7th inning stretch in about 5 minutes. Between the cherubic hymn and the communion hymn, there's a series of responses and the Lord's Prayer. And all we can say there is it's a good idea to keep them consistent, to keep it kind of the flow of the service. And personally, I choose that minor mode, the responses in G minor. You can sing the Lord's Prayer that same way, and One is Holy, all of those refrains, just to keep a kind of solemn and somber Lenten ethos throughout the service. Following One is Holy, you have the communion hymn, to O taste and see that the Lord is good, from Psalm 33. In your packet, I included a short article by Walter Obliszczuk that appeared in the year 2000 in the now defunct publication called Psalm Notes, which as I was looking back through my archive of issues, has some really marvelous articles about all kinds of music-related topics. Walter's article discusses the musical links that are actually observable in many of the old chant books between the cherubic hymn and the communion hymn. So if you're not familiar with psalm notes, I include the article here. If you would like to see, I don't think psalm notes is online anywhere, but if you write to Seraphim 6, to Ann Shep and Alice Hughes, and have a campaign, maybe they'll get the psalm notes issues up there for your perusal. Again, there's no shortage of musical settings of O Taste and See. In the 1990 edition of the Presanctified Liturgy, there's 13 of them, and several of them make that connection with the Now the Powers of Heaven, but not all of them. So all in all, that is a good way if you are concerned about maintaining a certain musical character to the Liturgy of the Presanctified. That's a good way of using those two pivotal moments of the Eucharistic encounter, as it will, Now the Powers and O Taste and See, to use a similar musical setting. Again, in your packet, you have a Kievan chant setting that kind of works with Father Soroka's Now the Powers, and a setting by Walter as well that can be sung with Eson, just like I mentioned about the in Now the Powers. After communion, things are fairly simple. After Taste the Heavenly Bread, we sing Let Our Mouths Be Filled. And usually we just use the usual melodies for that hymn. There aren't any special Lenten melodies as such. And then at the Litany of Thanksgiving, we return to whatever Lenten melody we've been using. We use that for Blessed Be the Name of the Lord as well. Following Blessed Be the Name of the Lord, we sing I Will Bless the Lord at All Times, which is essentially Psalm 33, which you notice is the same psalm from which the communion hymn was taken. Actually, the slightly shortened version of it, the first 10 verses. It's supposed to be sung at the end of every Vespers, and indeed every liturgy. I don't know, some parishes do that, but particularly in Great Lent. There are several musical settings out there circulating. In your packet, I included an adaptation, my adaptation of one by the Russian church composer and music educator, Porfiry Mironositsky. I only learned what his first name was recently. We've seen P. Mironositsky, but it's Porphyrios. And he lived from 1867 to 1932, and he was martyred for the faith by the communists. So he is one of the new martyrs of Russia that we either just celebrated or about to celebrate. So it's good to put a name to that musical setting. And there's a version by Father Sergei Glagoliev also from his collection. And that about does it for our journey through the Liturgy of the Presanctified. Let's take a short 3-minute break, and we'll finish up discussing some of the special hymns for the Sundays of Great Lent, and then we'll have some time for questions and discussion. So, 7th inning stretch.
If you're trying to lose belly fat, stop doing cardio. This sounds backwards.
Well, welcome back, everyone. And during that that musical interlude, that was, of course, Father Sergei Glagolev's "Taste and See that the Lord is Good," which is kind of a in the tradition of a refrain that is somewhat. It's a tune. In other words, it stays with you, and it's easily sung by a group. So in that rendition, we improvised the psalm verses in between and showed how that can function as a refrain. I thought that this would be a good time to mention a kind of an exciting new development in the world of Orthodox church music, and this is the good work that's being done by our colleague Benedict Sheehan and his team of musicians at St. Tikhon's Monastery and Seminary. Father Michael Hill, who is the bookstore manager there, has sent me this information that he wanted me to share with you. So just recently, I think within the last week or two, St. Tikhon's announced the launch of a new online resource called St. Tikhon's Music Resource, appropriately. And you have the link there. The idea is to offer all kinds of music for church choirs, large and small. It's as the press release says, it's rigorously edited and insightfully curated. So this, the quality of these musical settings is assured. It's in a digital format for printing, and you can purchase pieces per piece, or you can get an annual subscription for either as a parish or individually. In this initial phase, the resource contains a wide selection of repertoire from Vespers and liturgy. And incidentally, speaking of Vespers, also within the last month, the Vespers volume of St. Tikhon's two-part music has been published. I personally missed the announcement of it, so I don't know how widely it was announced, but we mentioned you may be familiar with the two-part Divine Liturgy volume, so Vespers is now also available. So this is eventually, it says that Matins and the Great Feasts will soon follow. So I encourage you to visit this website, see what's there, and support this effort with a subscription on behalf of your parish. And I believe there is an incentive discount if you act before March the 1st. It's an effort well worth supporting. We can look forward to the day when the English-speaking church here in North America will have all the required musical materials, well typeset, and for all the services, and we as musicians can focus our work on educating children, educating adults to sing all this music, focus on training choir leaders, and spend less time on searching for and adapting music, because the music will be there available for us. So to wrap up our session today, I'd like to turn our attention to the Sundays of Lent, which, as you know, all have their own particular commemoration. There they are, the Sundays of Lent. And just like the pre-Lenten Sundays, all the propers, the Stihira, the Troparia, the Cantacia, in some cases extra prochimena and communion hymns, all of this material is available on the OCA website. So all I'd like to do here is to share with you a system that we use at St. Catherine to manage all of this loose leaf material and to minimize the handing out and collecting and filing of a lot of paper. After many years of doing exactly that, passing out and collecting and filing, we assembled all this material into a nice spiral bound book. Here, see, it's colored purple, appropriate for Lent. And here it has dividers, A through F. This is material for pre-Lenten Sundays that we discussed at our last session. And then 1 through 5, we have the Sundays of Lent. And we have, in each section, we have the music and we have pointed text only. So we can easily go back and forth. If we have some singers that are not confident in their tones, we use the music version. If we have the A-team, we just go with the pointed text. And we have a similar book for the Pentecostarian, the period from St. Thomas Sunday through the All Saints of North America. And we'll show that to you a few weeks from now. It takes a bit of effort to make this up, but it will save you a lot of paper shuffling in the end. So I'd like to say just a few words about the ethos of Lenten Sundays. Except for the fact that we have these appointed hymns, the Troparion and Cantacia, and then we have a few Stihira from the night before, there are no hymnographic or musical elements that set aside the Sundays of Lent, other than the fact that it's the Liturgy of St. Basil. But in most parishes, that at least as far as I'm aware, the vestments and the icon cloths remain Lenten purple throughout, even on Sunday. So a few years ago, I gave a talk, actually a video presentation, about the musical ethos of Lenten services, and now I'm happy to say that video is available for you. It's a half-hour video, and you have a link there to it that you can watch. I talk about some of the things we already discussed about Lenten litanies and so on and so forth during Presanctified liturgy. But what I wanted to highlight was the main point that I made about how we highlight the Lenten Sundays at St. Catherine with a special set of litanies. And this is the so-called Vilnius Melody, named after the capital of Lithuania, Vilnius, which was first brought to my attention by my friend and colleague, Peter Yermachov, who actually spent some time in Vilnius as an exchange student. And you have in your packet a complete set of these litanies. And the litany goes, Lord, have mercy to thee, O Lord. So after several years, and this August, our mission will be celebrating its 10th year anniversary, these litanies have become our signature melodies for Lent. We sing them Saturday night at Vespers and Sundays at Sunday liturgies during the first 5 Sundays of Lent, but we don't use them during other Lenten services when we use the other quote unquote Lenten melody. So this is just a way to kind of remind people. Some people don't make it to the Lenten services in the middle of the week. They come to church on the Sunday of Lent and they hear something different. And it's actually quite a striking melody too, that too becomes a sort of an earworm, and that's a good thing. So the Liturgy of St. Basil, as you know, it has extensive Eucharistic prayers, and in the Russian tradition, it also has a signature melody. It's a lovely melody that has been if we can go way to the end of the thank you, Father. There's the Vilnius melody, but now if we go we go past that, those are all the variants. Okay, So here's this melody. A mercy of peace. It's a melody that's been arranged by a number of different composers. In our Orthodox Sacred Music Reference Library, we have at least 15 different arrangements and counting. And at least one of these here, the one you have in your packet by Yevstafi Azeyev, composer from the early 20th century in Russia, it's been adapted into English. But there's just one problem. Nowadays, most of our bishops have requested that the Eucharistic prayers of the Liturgy of St. Basil be said audibly rather than silently. So if anything, the portions of the anaphora that are sung by the choir should be shorter rather than longer. So confronted by this situation as a kind of a compromise, I created an abbreviated and more syllabic version of this melody. It's not typeset, but I offer it here for your consideration anyway. Perhaps in time, our composers will create other signature melodies for the Liturgy of St. Basil, but I just wanted, there it is. So you see, it's the same melody, but it's much more condensed, and it still again signals that this is the Liturgy of St. Basil. Kind of let us attend. Something special is going on, and this is one way in which we can do this with our use of musical devices. Also at the Liturgy of St. Basil, we sing a special hymn to the Mother of God, All Creation Rejoices. Now, Professor Gardner, whom we've mentioned before, in his book on Russian church singing, points out that in the 19th century, there were a number of unfortunate abbreviations and curtailments that were introduced into musical practice. And one of these he mentions was the practice of singing all of creation in plain tone 6 rather than in the tone 8, which is appointed to be sung. And that's indeed how many parishes sing it to this day. In Father Sergei's collection, there's a lovely arrangement but it's also abbreviated, and it's also in tone 6. So here I have for you a setting in tone 8, which is supposed to be sung, and actually it's very widespread in the Russian tradition, and there is a version of it in the English in an English adaptation of the Divine Liturgy of St. Vladimir Seminary Press, but it requires a good-sized choir. This arrangement is very scalable. It can be sung by a quartet, it can be sung by just 3 voices, or sung by 2 voices singing in parallel harmony, or you can actually, if you take the tenor part and sing it with an ison. So yeah, I don't know if you can hear the ison there. All of creation rejoices in you, oh, full of grace. You can really see there how this melody, why it's called Russian Greek chant, because this particular melody has a very close kinship with Byzantine tone 8 or mode 4 plagal. Also, I wanted to mention there's a Serbian chant melody that's in the St. Vladimir's Divine Liturgy book, which we also put with ison, which is works very well. Could you advance that, Father, to the next setting? In the liturgy book, it's just given there by, it's given just the melody, but in the setting in your packet here, it has the ison written. Yeah, there it was. So this one also works. Works very nicely with starting in unison, and then the basses drop down, and the tenors to the unison, and you have this melody which can be sung by the sopranos and altos, and it's a two-part version. But both of these work very, very well with just the melody and unison if you have a limited number of voices. So the final question regarding the Sundays of Great Lent is what to sing during the communion of the clergy, in addition to the appointed communion hymns. Based on what we said at the last webinar, we could definitely sing Open to Me the Doors of Repentance, which is appointed to be sung at Matins right through the 5th Sunday of Great Lent, but preferably not the Waters of Babylon. And we explained last time why, because that hymn is specifically appointed for that pre-Lenten period, the 3 Sundays before Lent, when we think about beginning our journey, because we realize we've been in exile away from the Father's house. But by Lent, we're already, by the 5th week, we should be well on our way to returning. And so by the Waters of Babylon, maybe not. We could also, on these Sundays, we could sing the Stihira of the saint being commemorated that day. There are Stihira at Vespers, there's Stihira at Matins. And then several years ago, when visiting St. Seraphim Cathedral in Santa Rosa, California, I heard a very striking composition by their choir director, Nicholas Custer, which is called The Time for Repentance Has Begun. And just a few months ago, Orthodox Music Press, which is a subsidiary of Musica Rusica, published this piece. And so you have a sample there. Again, we ask that you not photocopy it, but if you really want the music, you can order it from Musica Rusica, either in hard copy or a downloadable version. And we have a track. I don't know if you can juggle both playing the track and also looking at the music, but it's a very, very striking and beautiful setting for the time of Great Lent. It's on that preceding slide, the link to the audio file. What is that going to do for us?
Just give me one sec, Vlad, here.
And then it has a second part that continues. The day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, from the epistle of Apostle Peter. So with this, we bring our webinar, our second webinar, to a close. Thank you, Father Tom, for driving the console there, and thanks to all of you for attendance and for your prayers and your words of support. 2 weeks from now, we will talk about the services of Great and Holy Week. And now we can have some time for questions. Let's see. I see. I've been looking at the chat, but I can't see. Oh, I have a question. At the last webinar, someone shared a link to Adam sat before the gates of Eden. Did anybody here? Was that someone here, or did anybody grab that link, that file? Because I did not. I just saw it. Okay, somebody says I got it. So if you wouldn't mind, could you forward it to me? I would appreciate it.
So if you have any questions, you can either unmute yourself and just ask away, or you can place your question in the chat thread. And Rebecca, what we'll do is, once we get that from Vlad, we'll include that in the email that will be sent to you. I will send it, I promise, by tomorrow. I'm kind of out the door as soon as this is finished to go to Vigil. Oh, actually, they put it in the chat. So there it is. Mm-hmm. Perfect. You can download it right there. Any questions? Comments?
I guess I have a question. So in our choir is very small. We have a very humble, small parish, but we only have 2, strong voices. And I'm just wondering, well, usually what I'm trying to do now is have everybody sing the melody. So which is usually the alto part. And then I sing the bass. Instead of doing, the melody harmony, which actually we used to always do the harmony of the soprano voice. Anyway, in particular, I'm wondering about the Lord I Call during Presanctified. If I only have 2 strong voices for the trio. Normally, before we would do the what is it? I think the Bortniansky one, right? That one. And we would just have everybody do the soprano part. But I'm wondering about doing the trio, but I don't know what I'm asking now.
Well, I mean, if I could respond to that, as I mentioned in my talk, the Bortniansky trio doesn't really lend itself very well to that kind of just saying, well, we only have one part, so let's just sing one part. It would be much preferable, I think, to find a simple chant melody and have all the voices sing that, or you can sing it with an eson. And that would be, I think that would be preferable too, because the Bortniansky, it's kind of like, I don't know, taking a beautiful piano piece by Beethoven and saying, well, I don't really know how to play piano, so I'll just play it with one finger, as best as I can, and then bum 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 bum. It's not exactly you're not doing, you're not achieving, and I'm not saying that we're in church to put on a musical performance, but we're in church to render the sacred text in as beautiful a way as we can, and in the most appropriate way as we can. And that's why we talked about what constitutes appropriateness, what constitutes success in our presentation. That would be my recommendation. And I don't know if somebody else wants to jump in and share their experience. By all means, feel free to do so. But there is life beyond Bortnyansky.
This is Denise Norman from Savannah, Georgia, and I have a solution which has worked really well for us, and in particular this year, where most likely for every Presanctified, it will be myself alone, possibly with a reader, possibly not. I may also be the reader, and the reader is not a particularly talented reader. So there is some interesting music by a person whose last name is Wigglesworth on the Archdiocese of Canada, the OCA website. And there is where a very nice melodic refrain, and the reader can simply chant "The Lord I Call" in between. And that worked really well for us last year with our very reduced circumstances. And I have a feeling that will work well for us again this year.
Vlad, there's also a question from Edith in the chat, and it says, in such cases of true 4-part harmony, is it helpful if you have a small group? Oh, wait, she had a previous question. Let me start with that. This about the filler. You had mentioned about filler parts. Of course, it depends on the harmonization. This only works correct for ones written in this way with a leading melody, harmony, bass, and filler. Frequently, the tenor part has the third and not doubling the fifth or whatever. So it's difficult in such cases to do without the tenor. And then she says, in such cases of true 4-part harmony, is it helpful if you have a small group to have someone who is a good reader and quick on their feet to be sure to always sing the harmony, whether it is in alto or tenor, jumping as necessary? Tricky.
I think within the same, to do that within the context of the same hymn, if I understand the question correctly, I think that might be somewhat problematic. I would look for alternative ways, perhaps rendering that same melody, but in a way that you can assign the parts to their roles and then have them consistently follow that. Just as it's difficult to change voicings in the middle of a service. You start with a certain compliment because somebody's late, and then all of a sudden that person arrives and you say, oh, well, now I'm here. Now we have to retune, repitch, rearrange ourselves. It's very difficult to do that. It's much better to start a certain way and carry on that way for throughout the service. So again, that's the best advice I can offer in kind of without knowing specifically what we're talking about here.
Beth also has a question similar. Do you have suggestions for developing singers to help them switch between parts? My singers aren't strong enough to do that, and we rarely have 4 parts.
Well, the best way, I think, is to, again, the answer has to be in some kind of rehearsal or warm-up situation, preferably not in church. I mean, in fact, I think that's, it's sort of obvious, but it perhaps bears restating. The kleros, or the choir loft, is not the place for rehearsals, meaning during the service. You don't want to try out things during the service when you're singing. These things, this is why, as someone already has mentioned, it's very helpful to teach every member of the choir to sing the melody. And then try different people singing a harmony. I mean, this is how people naturally sing in group singing situations. You know, someone's a melodist, someone's a harmonizer. But we might also change that. Sing in different, practice singing in different keys. You know, that's simply a way of saying that you should be, depending on the voices, you may want to raise or lower the pitch at which you're singing. If the soprano part is too high as written and you only have altos there, then perhaps unless it's some composed piece where the composer very clearly had a certain key in mind, but with chant arrangements, you can change the key. You can lower it a step or a third or even a fourth if need be, and again assign voices that will sound good together. That's the key, I think, is how does it end up sounding in the end.
All right, we have time for a few more questions. Anyone would like to unmute?
I have a question, Vlad. You had mentioned the signature melody for the anaphora of St. Basil, which you would sing during Lent.
Yes.
Any liturgy of St. Basil, or would it be specific to just the services in Lent?
Well, in my experience, it's for any liturgy of St. Basil. So it would also be, you know, Holy Thursday, Holy Saturday, you know, Theophany Eve, Nativity Eve. Those are, I think, the 9, or I think there's 10 times that the liturgy of St. Basil is prescribed. So yeah, it just says Liturgy of St. Basil, you know, and like I say, it doesn't have to be that particular melody. That's just, you know, all these traditions. When we say tradition, there was a time in the Slavic realm, in Russia and Ukraine, and when there were some other melodies at that time sung, but eventually, as these chant books first began to be published in the 18th century and throughout all the republications, these particular melodies have been associated with the liturgy of St. Basil. And in this case, they were done, it was extremely extended to cover the Eucharistic prayers. But if our practice has changed, we want to still keep some sense of the Eucharistic, of that connection, that signature connection of the liturgy of St. Basil. It has to do with, I think it has to do, you know, in a much broader sense, you know, music and musical cues, how they come to condition us, how we respond to them as human beings. It's a very, it's both overt and subtle. And, you know, the advertising industry knows that very much when they come up with jingles and theme songs for various products. I don't mean to trivialize what we do in the liturgy, but it kind of works the same way. We're still human beings, and we want to come, and when we come to church and we hear these auditory cues, we have visual cues, right? We come in, oh, there's an icon in the center. Oh, it must be, I forgot to check my calendar. It must be that saint's feast day, you know, because their icon is in the center. There's a visual cue. You know, you walk in, oh, the cloths are all red. You know, we must be in Advent, or we must be a feast of the cross. You know, there's that whole color scheme that the church has worked out over the years with vestments and icon cloths and all that. So again, all of this has to do very much with our Orthodox ethos of worship. We involve the whole body, we involve all the senses, and we want to provide as musicians, we want to be sensitive to that, and we want to be able to provide those types of auditory cues as well as all the other things that the church provides.
I have a question if we have time,
We do.
and that would be the organization of your book.
Mhm.
As the text, pointed text. and
Can
then-
you speak up a little bit? We're having a hard time hearing you.
So I have a question concerning
Yeah.
the organization of your book for Great Lent and the pointed text as well as the written text. The pointed text, wouldn't those change based on the saint of the day per where we are in the liturgical year? What pieces do you put in there that do not change? Or do you just pass out the text for the saint of the day?
Well,
Now I'm talking, I guess maybe I'm thinking outside of Saint Gregory of Palamas, for instance, for the second week. Is there another, I can't remember, is there another saint that we commemorate that weekend, or is it just?
in most cases, I will answer in a general way. My recollection is that, you know, unless it's someone like Saint Tikhon, who is celebrated on you know, in April. I think there's a feast of Saint Innocent, a feast of Saint Tikhon, which are you know, they will fall on different days of Lent. Those we would not include in there. But the things that are included in this book are the portions of the Lenten Triodion which do not change. And in most cases, you know, the saint of the Triodion or the commemoration of the Triodion takes precedence over the saint of the day. Okay, so that's what it is. Yeah, I mean, I've gotten a few requests here about how this is organized. It took a little planning, and you know, before we spiral bound it, we went through a few trial periods, and because with spiral binding, it's not. It helps to have a spiral binding machine. You know, if you have to go running out to FedEx every time, that could get prohibitive. But yeah, you know, I could easily, I mean, it wouldn't be much different from the outlines that I've already provided of there, but I can make a few specific recommendations and send that out. Also, I wanted to mention in your chat, I posted another version of All of Creation, and this is with the melody in the alto part. You can see by comparing the one that I initially passed out, where the melody's in the soprano. Here it's in the alto part with the soprano a third above. So again, you can see how those two versions, you know, what's the same about them, what's different about them, how the parts change, and if necessary, you can use that as a kind of a teaching device. Say, well, look at this, and then now look at this, and who's got what part, and who's singing what part. I realize, you know, for some choirs and some singers, that's a very simple thing, but for others, that may be, you know, a very advanced skill. Doesn't mean it shouldn't be learned. It should be in one of those aspirations that you put on your SOAR diagram. You may not get to it this year, but that's something definitely to aspire to, is to have a group of singers who can easily switch from part to part. And that way, you know that no matter what circumstances, you know, God or nature sends your way, you are covered in terms of the singing. Any other questions?
Can you clarify how we can do that? I love what you're saying about the flexibility of the singers. I'm the flexible singer in my group as a director, and it's very difficult to do that while you're directing people. Yeah. And most of my people have such rudimentary reading skills They guess really, really well. They're incredible to work with. But if I were to have to tell someone to do a different part, I would have to reset the whole music each time, and I don't have time to do that. So can you give a suggestion for how to start educating them so they can be fluid? Because I only have so much time with them as well.
Right. Well, that would be my first question is do you have opportunities to practice with them? You know, we used to talk about the difficulties of getting people together, and people live out in the suburbs, and the churches in the city, and we have commutes and all this. Now all of a sudden we have this pandemic and everybody's staying home anyway. Is this something that you could do? It's very difficult to hold a group rehearsal over Zoom. I would say nigh impossible, but you can meet individually with singers, and you could one-on-one simply do listen to what I sing, and here's the music. Listen to what I sing. Now, repeat after me or repeat with me. People learn in different ways. I believe that a great many church singers rely on their ear. They may read music to a certain degree, but they rely on their ears a lot. And that's not a bad thing. Consider that music notation was only invented, somewhere around the year 1000 as we know it. So what did people do before? They sang in churches. We know that. They sang services. The whole congregation of Hagia Sophia sang refrains. They didn't all have little printed pamphlets, with dividers to teach them. They responded to auditory cues. They showed up in church and they sang what they heard in church. They followed the lead singer. So I realize that may not be an exact answer to your question, but I would find out, first of all, try and find out, what do your singers actually know? What are they actually seeing when they look at that music? You might be surprised to the degree to which they rely on their ears, in which case, you need to work with that and say, okay, can we just practice, take a simple melody and harmonize in thirds. It can be, O Heavenly King, or it could be, Mary Had a Little Lamb, but, or some folk song.
Yeah.
Just see where they're at, and each singer might be at a different spot.
Sure.
But I would say that for too long we've been tied to that 4-part harmony on the score, as written in the score, and we can only sing what's there. So let's we need to think outside the box. Father Tom, I know you have an appointment to run to.
Well, that's okay. We have because we have 3 minutes left, and I got a question via emails. This is like Ancient Faith Radio. I'm getting questions from all over the place. It says, from Jennifer, our choir is small, and during the pandemic consists of myself, son, and husband doing 3 parts. How can we manage to breathe and swallow without interrupting the flow of the music? We are ready to collapse at the end of the service, sometimes before. Thank you for the webinar.
And it's a family problem. Wow. Breathing, of course, is extraordinarily important. And it's a good idea to, especially with a closely knit family unit like this. Now, they certainly can't have any excuse for not practicing together. So work out where that's going to be happening, where those breaths are going to be happening. And it's okay to take a breath at the end of a period, certainly. If you have a choir of 20, our colleague in Russia, Vladimir Gorbik, doesn't allow his choir to breathe anywhere in the middle of a hymn. They patch breathe throughout the whole thing. That doesn't work quite as well with three singers. I agree. So you practice that, perhaps. It actually is possible. You simply skip a word and take a breath in the context of the music as you need to, and only you will know. Only you will know. There are two ways of taking breaths, like I said, overtly, and then this kind of inconspicuously snatching a breath when nobody will notice. And if you don't advertise it, nobody will notice.
Okay,
Can I give a suggestion for two things? I can sing soprano or alto. Normally I sing alto. So for Lord I Call, if I wasn't there, nobody sang the melody. And so for like 6 months, I had let one woman who normally sang soprano, I had her sing with the alto with me. And so now she can switch. If I'm not there, she'll sing the alto part on Lord I Call in the Apostica. The other thing is I have a little budget of $3,000, I'm not paid, $3,000. And for the past 4 years, what I have done is use that to send choir members for voice lessons, choir directing, because people with families might not have the money to do that. And it's really, really improved the singing of certain people in the choir.
Well, thank you for mentioning that. It's a two-way street. We in the music department here try to offer those opportunities, but it's also important that parishes recognize the importance of that investment in church music, whatever form it takes. It could be our parish just put out a line item in the budget for an assistant choir director for me, who is going to be training and as time goes on, so that there's a smooth transition. Before the pandemic, Benedict and Maria Sheehan were doing some wonderful seminars. Perhaps some of you attended them, workshops where they talked about the tradition, maintaining the tradition and cultivating church singing in a parish and what that requires. It requires, like all enterprises, it requires a plan. It requires commitment. It requires budgetary commitment and human resource commitment. And that's the only way that we can survive. With clergy, it's exactly the same thing. Except with clergy, we have seminaries to send them to. With church musicians, we don't have those yet. We don't have a school of music for church musicians that we can sing them to. But we're trying to do our best, right, Father Tom? What we're doing here, and hopefully by your suggestions and your support and your prayers, we'll be able to expand our offerings. There's the Patram Institute that offers voice instruction and other manners of instruction. There are individuals out there who are qualified teachers with doctorates who are just searching for the opportunity to share their knowledge and to cultivate the future generations of church musicians. So thank you all, and we'll continue in this vein.
All right, very good. Thank you, Vlad, and thank you to everyone who attended today. We want to remind you that the third series, the third of our series is, and I apologize, I think it's in 3 weeks, right? Or 2 weeks. I should know this.
It's in 2 weeks.
It's in 2 weeks. Okay.
2 weeks.
So in 2 Saturdays, we'll see you. Please make sure that you register for that. So you need to register in order to come to that. You need to register separately. You will receive an email sometime late tonight or tomorrow, I promise, with everything that we received today, including this one piece. Thank you, Vlad, for compiling all of this very valuable music. We appreciate all of your knowledge and experience that you're passing on to all of our wonderful singers and choir directors. Thank you. All right. Have a blessed Lord's Day. Go to church tonight. Sing a vigil. Bye.
Boba,
Yes.
could I ask you a question?
You certainly can, unless Father is going to.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Mhm.
Pull the.
I'm sorry. So as you know, being the oldest parish in North America, we have files and files and files of music and text that has been passed down and which we do not use anymore. And my question is, I need some guidance as to or even a blessing to get rid of it. I know that there's a need for history, but it's I think it's a fire hazard, and it's confusing to those who will come after me.
Yes,
So
I would say that's I'm sure that's a question that you know you just happen to be in the oldest parish. That's kind of a question perhaps to direct to Alexis Liberov.